Hello class, are you ready for today's session? So today we will continue with the chapter, but before that let's discuss the question answers. I had told you all to find the difference between SSD and HDD and their full form. SSD is solid state drive and HDD is hard disk drive. The major difference is that in SSD the data is more secure and works faster because it does not have any moving parts. All the information is stored on a microchip. And in an HDD, there are disks and there is a reader. There's a file reader handle that will go and tap on the file, and then the disk will rotate and we will read the data. Is that clear? So this is the difference between SSD and HDD. All right. So we continue with today's chapter. I hope you all have your pens and books together. Please not make notes while I'm teaching. So today we start with data capturing, storage, and retrieval. Data capturing. It involves the process of gathering data from different sources in the digital form. You have to gather data from different sources in the digital form. This capturing may vary from simple instruments like keyboard, barcode readers, user shopping outlets, comments or posts over social media, remote sensors, on an Earth orbiting satellite. All these things give us digital form of data. Sometimes heterogeneity among data sources makes data capturing a complex task. Heterogeneity means different kinds of data. So capturing it means it becomes a very difficult task. The process of storing the captured data for processing later is called data storage. So for example, if I am making a video right now, while I'm making it, it is being captured. Okay, that is that data capture. But saving the video on my computer is data storage. That is the process of storing the captured data for processing later. Nowadays, data is being produced at a very high rate, and therefore storage devices start helping us to simplify these costs. They start by having a cheaper cost. There are numerous digital storage devices available in the market. Data keeps on increasing with time. Hence, storage devices are also required to be upgraded periodically. You know, the first storage device that was made was a floppy disk, and 1.4 MB of data could store, and it was considered too huge at that time because the kind of data we had were also very small. Then later on we moved on to CD drive, then came DVD, then came Blu-ray disc. Nowadays we have pen drive, simultaneously came in pen drive, which has now become hard disk drives, and now we have solid state drive. All these, if you pay attention, their capacities have increased from 1.4 MB to up right now people have 2 TB of hard disk. That's also very less, I'm thinking. I know of someone who has, I think, more than that. I think he has, if you look at servers also, so the data capacity is increasing. In large organizations, computers with larger and faster storage are called data servers. Yes, data server. They are deployed to store vast amount of data. So there is a particular computer just to save data over there. Okay, and it's very big and very huge with lots of storage, and still this will also get full because we are producing lots of data every day. Such dedicated computers help in processing data efficiently. However, the cost, that is hardware and software, of setting up a data server as well as its maintenance is high, especially for small organizations and startups. That's why small organizations do not prefer it. Only the big organizations prefer it. Data retrieval. It involves fetching data from storage devices for its processing as per the user requirement. As databases grow, the challenges involved in search and retrieval of the data in acceptable time also increases. Databases growing, data servers are filled with data, so the time involved in searching for the data we want and retrieving it has increased. So we have to make sure that this time is also not increased and it is in an acceptable limit. Minimizing data access time is crucial for faster data processing. If I want an image right now, okay, I have it in Google Photos, I go search for it. But suppose it tells me, it will take 2 days to find or 3 days to find. The entire need for it will go away by then. Correct? So minimizing data access time is crucial for faster processing of data. Okay, this is another Bhusha. Yes. So now we know we need to find data very fast. We know we can store data. Now comes data deletion and recovery. One of the biggest threats associated with digital data is its deletion. The storage devices can malfunction or they can crash down, resulting in deleting of data stored. Users can accidentally erase data from storage devices, or a hacker or malware can delete the digital data intentionally. It is possible that they intentionally delete some data, a hacker, or it is possible that your device stops working, or your device crashes down and all your data is lost. Even your phone can get stolen and all your data is lost. Deleting digital stored data means changing of the data at bit level, which can be very time consuming. This is very important. Deleting digital data, when someone wants to really delete it, it means going right down to the bit level, that is the binary form in which the data is stored, and changing it. Now that can become very time consuming. So what actually happens when you press the delete button? What actually happens is, therefore, when any data is simply deleted, its address entry is marked as free. Basically, what happens is, let's say we have a room of lockers and there are 4 lockers in it. Okay, I have something kept, let's say I have books in locker 1, shoes in locker 2, let's put some food in locker number 3. Now today I do not need the locker number 3, I do not need the food, so I press delete. Now when you press delete, what we actually imagine is all the food is taken and thrown into the dustbin. But that does not happen. What actually happens is, only locker number 3 is now available. If someone else wants to put some stuff in locker number 3, it will be considered as empty. Although the food is still inside the locker, it's not removed. So the other data will come on top of the food. Giving you one more example, let's say I have a cupboard with 4 drawers. Okay, my first drawer, second drawer, third drawer, all 3 have data, fourth drawer also. Now I bring in something else and there is no drawers left. So I decide to empty one drawer and put it inside. This is what we actually imagine happens in the computer. But true, the real story is, only the entry, only that locker or only that space or only that drawer is now considered as available. It is now considered available. So whatever needs to be put on top of the previous data. That much space is shown as empty to the user. So whenever any data is simply deleted, its address entry is marked as free, and that much space is shown as empty to the user without actually deleting the data. It is considered empty without actually deleting the data. Now, data retrieval. In case, so if you understood what I explained to you, you will realize that the data is not really deleted, nothing, no changes have been made at the bit level. Only that area has been marked as free. That means new information or new data can be put over there. The old data is still there. Because the old data is still there is a possibility we can retrieve that data. In case data gets deleted accidentally or it gets corrupted, there arises a need to recover the data. Recovery of the data is possible only if the contents or memory space marked as deleted have not been overwritten by some other data. Now, recovery of data is possible only if the contents or the memory space marked as deleted have not been overwritten. But actually, you can even overwritten data can be retrieved. You need to have the correct software. Up till 7 times overwritten data have been retrieved up till now. Data recovery is a process of recovering deleted, corrupted, and lost data from the secondary storage devices. Because you remember in primary storage devices, we have RAM, ROM. RAM is anyways volatile. Nothing is going to get stored there. And in ROM, there is only manufacturer information that is required to run the computer. Now, security. There are usually two security concerns associated with data. One is its deletion by some unauthorized person or software. These concerns can be avoided by limiting access to the computer system and using passwords for the user accounts and files wherever possible. There is also an option of encrypting files to protect them from unwanted modification. You can even encrypt your files so that nobody can come and change it. Nobody can come and modify it. The other concern is related to unwanted recovery of data by unauthorized users of software. Now, very important, this may be happening and you all are not aware. Many times we discard our old, broken storage devices without taking the care to delete the data. We assume that the contents of the deleted files are permanently removed. We assume that whatever we deleted is permanently removed. However, if these storage devices fall into the hands of mischief mongers, they can easily recover data from such devices. This poses a threat to data confidentiality. So even if if your device is in the hands of a mischief monger, what will happen? Your confidentiality of your information is lost. This concern can be mitigated, that is solved, by using proper tools to delete or shred data before disposing of any old or faulty storage devices. So yes, you can even shred your devices. You can even buy an electronic, you get a machine that will help you to electronically or manually also completely reform the data, and then you can pass on the hard. This is another big topic. This is a big topic in itself, and I will try and complete the entire topic over here. For this, I want you to sit with pen and paper. You will be drawing a tree diagram as and when I'm explaining all the parts, and do not forget to write the examples along with it. The word software. What is a software? Now, hardware needs to be operated by a set of instructions. If I only give you a keyboard, it's going to be useless for you. If I only give you a monitor or a screen, it's going to be completely useless to you unless it is accompanied by a software. A software will help you use those hardwares. Okay? It is that component of a computer system which we cannot touch or view physically. It comprises the instructions and data to be processed using the computer hardware. The computer software and hardware complete any task together. So they are a team. Even if I give you only a software, it won't work. Only hardware will not work. You need to have a combination of both to complete any task. The software comprises a set of instructions which on execution deliver the desired outcome. Some examples of software include operating systems like Ubuntu or Windows 7, Windows 10, word processing tools like LibreOffice or Microsoft Word, video players like VLC, photo editors like GIMP and LibreOffice Draw. All these are examples of software. Now, how many softwares we have? We have 3 types of software. And how are they classified? They are classified depending on the mode of interaction with hardware and the function that the software performs. The software are broadly classified into 3 categories. The first one is system software, second one is programming tools, and the third one is application software. System software. The software that provides the basic functionality to operate a computer by interacting directly with its constituent hardware is termed as system software. A system software knows how to operate and use different hardware components of a computer. It provides services directly to the end user or to some other software. Examples of system software include operating systems, system utilities, and device drivers. These are the softwares that help the computer to run. Okay, they help the hardware to operate and they help all the components of a computer to run. The system software are further divided into 3 parts, which is operating system, device drivers, and system utilities. Operating system is the system of software that operates the computer. So we have Windows, Macintosh, Android, all these are the operating system software. An operating system is the most basic system software without which other softwares cannot work. Without the operating system software, no other softwares can work. The operating system manages other application programs and provides access and security to the users of the system. Some of the popular operating systems are Windows, Linux, Macintosh, Ubuntu, Fedora, etc. System utility. Software used for maintenance and configuration of the computer is called system utility. So if you have this disk defragment, or you have all the other small softwares that help us to maintain and configure our computer, those are called system utility. Some system utilities are shipped with the operating system. For example, disk defragmentation tool, formatting utility, system restore utility, etc. Another set of utilities are those which are not shipped with the operating system but are required to improve the performance of the system. For example, antivirus software, disk cleaner tool, disk compression software. These help us to maintain and configure our computer. Those are called as system utilities. And device drivers, the purpose of a device driver is to ensure proper functioning of a particular device. The responsibility for overall control, operation, and management of a particular device at the hardware level is delegated to its device driver. The device driver acts as an interface between the device and the operating system. It provides the required services by hiding the details of the operations at the hardware level. A device driver acts as a mediator between the operating system and the attached device. So all our computers, peripherals, that is keyboard, mouse, speaker, all of these have a driver. That is the software that enables it to run smoothly. So this is an entire diagram of the categorization of software. We have a user who interacts with the user interface, and under the user interface is the application software and programming tools. And then we have the system software, which is a part which is made up of system utilities, operating system, and device drivers. And finally, below this is the hardware. Okay. Second type of Second type of softwares are called programming tools. Computers and humans understand completely different languages. While humans are able to write programs in high level language, computers only understand machine language. So computers and humans have two different languages. We humans, we can write programs in a high level language, but a computer can only understand machine language. So there's a continuous need for conversion from high level language to machine level language. So we use translators. For this work, we use translators. Also, to write the instruction, we use code editors, which are in this year we will be using IDLE code editor, which we will be using for Python. We will learn about the programming languages, the language translators, and the program developmental tools. Programming languages. It is very difficult for a human to begin to write instructions in the form of ones and zeros. Today, if you had to tell the computer to, after starting, if you had to tell the computer in a series of ones and zeros to open the internet or to open YouTube, it would become very difficult. So different types of computer programming languages are developed to simplify the code. So we use software. These softwares are written in languages. Like we said on the previous slide, we can write high level languages and computers can read low level, the machine language, which is zeros and ones. But we cannot write an entire set of instructions in zeros and ones. Hence, we use programming language which help us to simplify this work. Two major categories of computer programming languages are low level languages and high level languages. Now, low-level languages are machine-dependent languages and include machine language and assembly language. Low-level languages include the machine language and the assembly language. Machine languages is what? It's the one that uses ones and zeros to write instructions, and this language is directly understood and executed by the computer. Writing a code in machine language is difficult as one has to remember all the operation codes and machine addresses. Also, finding errors in machine language is a very difficult task. To simplify the writing of code, assembly language was developed. What is assembly language? Assembly language allows usage of English-like words and symbols instead of using 1 and 0. Now, there was a major problem with assembly language though. One major drawback of writing a code in this language is that the code is computer specific. That means the code written for one type of CPU cannot be used for another type of CPU. So if this program or if this software is run on my computer, it will not run on your computer because we both have different CPU chips. Okay, so this became a big problem because nowadays we are upgrading computers so fast, we are going to use another chip. But if my software is chip dependent, then it will only work in that particular computer. Then came high level languages. High level languages are machine independent. That means they will run on your computer and my computer. And they're also simple to write a code in. But what's the problem with it? The computer cannot read a high level language. Now instructions are written using English words, and each high level language follows a set of rules similar to natural languages. So all the Python like we are going to learn is going to be a high level language, and we are going to be writing literally in English, and the computer is going to understand it. But how is it possible that the computer will understand it? Because didn't I just tell you computer does not understand high level language? Well, these languages are not directly understood by the computer. Translators are needed to translate the high level language code into machine language. Now, examples of high level languages are C++, Java, Python. That means we will write a language, we will write a code in the high level language. The computer will translate this code into assembly language, which will be read by the CPU. Okay. Now, what are language translators? A translator is needed to convert program written in assembly or high-level language to machine language. The program code written in assembly or high-level language is called source code, and the source code is converted by a translator into the machine understandable form called object code. So when we write a code on the computer, that is called a source code because it's written in high level language. Any code written in high level language is called source code. This code is translated by the translator into machine language, and this becomes object code. Okay, so look at the diagram, source code and goes to the translator and becomes object code. There are three types of translators: assembler, compiler, interpreter. We have different types of computer languages, so we need different types of converters to convert from source code to object code, source code to machine code. Machine code and object code are both the same thing. Assembler. The translator used to convert the code written in assembly language to machine language is called an assembler. Now, what was the problem with assembler? Assembly language was machine dependent, meaning if it worked on one machine, it would not necessarily work on another machine. But if my code is written in this language, the assembly language, then I need an assembler that will convert my code from assembly language to machine language. Each assembler can understand a specific microprocessor instruction set only, and hence machine code is not portable. It's not portable. It cannot be used on multiple computers. It would be used only on certain type of computers. We also need translators to convert codes written in high-level language to machine understandable form for execution by the computer. We also need translators to convert code written in high-level language, that is Python, to machine understandable form, okay, for execution by the computer. Otherwise, the computer will not be able to read it. Compiler converts the source code into machine code. If the code follows all syntactic rules of the language, then it is executed by the computer. Once translated, the compiler is not needed. Now, what does a compiler do? We had assembler, which was translating information from assembly language to machine language. We have compiler, which is also which compiles the source code to object code. And how does it compile? It will check the code for synthetic errors. Syntactic means all the rules of the language. If all the rules of the language have been followed in that code will be made, another copy of it will be made, which is in the machine language. And remember, once you compile one object, once you compile one program, one set of instructions, you will not need to compile that set of instructions again. An object code will be created and you can use that object code or machine code to run the program again and again and again. You will not need a compiler. But what happens in an interpreter? An interpreter translates at one line at a time. So while the compiler is going to translate the entire code and make it into a machine language, what interpreter will do, it will read one line, convert that one line into machine language. Read the second line and convert the second line into machine language. Interpreter takes one line, converts it into executable code only if the line is syntactically correct. Only if the line is correct will it convert it into machine language. And then it will keep repeating these steps for all lines in the code. Interpreter is always needed wherever a source code is to be executed. Whenever you have a source code and you are going to execute it using an interpreter, what will happen? It will read the first line and will change it to machine language, second line, third line, fourth line. But whatever it is changing, it is not going to save the second file. It is not going to save all those lines that it is converting. That means whenever you will be running this program again, you will again need an interpreter to convert it into machine code. So Python uses an interpreter and C++ uses a compiler. Program developmental tools. We write programs in a text editor. An editor is a software that allows us to create a text file where we type instructions and store the file as the source code. Then, an appropriate translator is used to get the object code for execution. In order to simplify the program development, there are softwares called Integrated Developmental Environment, IDE. Python IDLE we are going to use. Over there, IDLE stands for Integrated Development Learning Environment. Okay, and this is IDE. Most of the languages have an IDE, that is an Integrated Development Tool environment, consisting of text editor, building tools, and a debugger. A program can be typed, compiled, and debugged all from the IDE directly. Besides the Python IDLE, NetBeans, Eclipse, Atom, Lazarus are a few examples of IDE. Debugger, as the name implies, is the software used to detect and correct errors in the source code. So this IDE has, we can type our programs in the IDE. IDE will have a compiler and an interpreter and an assembler, all three, and whatever is required for our programming language will be used to make the object code. The IDEs also have a debugger in it. A debugger is a tool that will check for mistakes. It will only check for syntactical mistakes. It will not check for logic mistakes. So if you write something like 4 minus 100, it is not going to tell you there's an error. It will not tell you you have made a logical error. You cannot deduct row, or you cannot say 100, or you cannot say 4 minus 100, you have to say 100 minus 4. But if you have written something like cat does that, which doesn't make any sense, then it will correct you. If the syntactic of the language is incorrect, it will point out and correct you. Okay, we are not going to, okay, let me just check, wait. Okay, I saw we can do this topic for today and stop. Application software. Specific software that works on top of the system software is termed as application software. There are two broad categories of application software, which is general purpose software and customized software. Application software developed for generic applications to cater a bigger audience in general is called general purpose software. So if you have Microsoft Word, it has been made for everybody. Everybody can use it. It is called a general purpose software. Ready-made application software can be used by end users as per their requirement. A spreadsheet tool can be used by any computer to calculations to create account sheets. Adobe Photoshop. 99% of softwares you all know are general purpose software. Customized software. These are custom or tailor-made application software that are developed to meet the requirements of a specific organization of individuals. If you go to a bank, you will see bankers are using a special software in which they write the debit, credit, checkbooks, all these entries are done. Now, you cannot sit and download that software. It will not work for you because this is not a general purpose software. This is a customized software for that particular bank. They are better suited to the needs of an individual or an organization, considering that they are designed as per social requirements. Some examples of user-defined software include websites, school management software, accounting software, etc. It is similar to buying a piece of cloth and getting a tailor-made garment with the fitting color, fabric, and fabric of our choice. So the simple difference is if we go to website and pick up a dress, it's a general purpose software. That means it is something that everyone can use. But if I go to a designer and get a dress stitched exactly like I wanted, that fits only me. Now this dress cannot be worn by anyone else. It is only for me. All right. This is a major difference between customized software and general purpose software. Write down 2 homeworks for today's session. Number 1, I want you all to do at least a 4 to 5 point differentiation between a compiler and an interpreter. And number 2, I want you all to get me at least 3 names of customized software. Okay, with this, I will end my today's session. I hope you all had a good time. Bye bye. See you. Take care.